Physics is the most patient teacher in the universe. It never yells. It never argues. It doesn't tweet angry threads or leave passive-aggressive comments. It simply waits. And when someone decides they're smarter than gravity, stronger than electricity, or faster than a 2,000-pound predator, physics responds with a demonstration. A very short demonstration. Tonight you're about to meet 10 people who tried to debate the laws of the universe like it was a Reddit comment section. They had theories. They had confidence. Some of them even had a plan. What they did not have was a basic understanding of how reality works. And reality has a very simple policy. No exceptions, no negotiations, no refunds. These are 10 moments when human ego walked confidently onto the battlefield, and physics immediately pressed the delete button. Let's begin with a man who believed he had cracked the code to world peace between humans and sharks. Unfortunately, sharks had already solved the equation. Case 1. The Shark Whisperer. On the golden beaches of Australia, where surfers treat waves like religion and sunscreen like holy water, lived a man named Kai. Kai wasn't just a surfer. According to Kai, he was something much more important. A shark expert. Not the boring kind with a marine biology degree. No, Kai was what the internet calls a self-taught specialist, which means he had watched several documentaries, read half a blog post, and now felt spiritually qualified to correct scientists. His main belief was simple. Sharks weren't dangerous. They were just misunderstood sea puppies. Every shark attack, according to Kai, was just a tragic case of mistaken identity. Sharks think surfers are seals, he would explain, at beach bonfires to people who were trying very hard to ignore him. Kai believed he had the solution. If sharks bite surfers by accident, then give them something else to eat first. In Kai's mind, this was brilliant. In reality, it was the marine biology equivalent of trying to stop bank robbers by handing them a free gun. But Kai wasn't interested in criticism. He was interested in proving everyone wrong. His experimental setup was simple. He attached several large, bloody chunks of tuna directly to his surfboard ankle leash. Yes, the same leash that connects the surfer to the board. Which meant that, from a shark's perspective, Kai had just installed a fresh seafood buffet directly onto his leg. Then he paddled out to a stretch of water locals lovingly referred to as the buffet, a well-known shark hotspot. Other surfers avoided it. Kai called it the perfect laboratory. Within minutes, the experiment began. A large great white appeared, slicing through the water like a torpedo with teeth. Kai probably felt like Galileo discovering gravity. See, he likely thought, they're curious. The shark circled. Then it went straight for the tuna. Success. Kai's theory was working. Right up until the moment the smell of blood attracted more sharks. Because here's something Kai forgot to include in his research. Sharks don't host polite dinner parties. They host feeding frenzies. Soon there were 2 sharks, then 3. The water exploded into chaos, fins cutting the surface, jaws snapping, bodies colliding. And in the middle of this aquatic bar fight sat Kai, still connected to the appetizer. When the tuna was gone, the sharks did what any efficient predator does. They looked for the next available meat source. Kai had set out to prove sharks misunderstood humans. In the end, the sharks understood him perfectly. Just another piece of meat floating in the buffet. And physics had once again confirmed an important rule. If you tie food to your leg in shark territory, you have officially joined the menu. Case 2. The Cave That Ate an Explorer. Deep under the green rolling hills of England's Peak District lies a world that most people wisely avoid. A world of narrow tunnels, cold limestone, and passages so tight that even light struggles to squeeze through. To normal people, caves are beautiful, from the outside. To Alistair, they were an invitation. Alistair was what you might call an enthusiastic amateur explorer. The kind of guy who owned multiple headlamps, had read half of a cave survival manual, and believed that destiny was hiding just one narrow tunnel away. He liked to compare himself to Indiana Jones. His friends mostly compared him to someone who needed hobbies that didn't involve getting stuck underground forever. One afternoon, while exploring a cave system with a few fellow cavers, Alistair found something exciting. A crack in the rock. A vertical slit barely wider than a human chest. Cavers have a name for formations like this. They call it the letterbox because the only way through it is to slide in like a piece of mail. His friends took one look and immediately voted nope. One of them even said the words every explorer should listen to. That looks like a death trap. But Alistair didn't hear death trap. He heard undiscovered chamber. In his mind, this tiny crack was clearly guarding some hidden cave nobody had ever seen before. The kind that would get him featured in documentaries, maybe even National Geographic. Fame was obviously just one tight squeeze away. The technique, according to caving guides, was simple. Remove bulky gear, exhale completely, compress your chest, slide in head first, and hope the cave gods are feeling generous that day. Alistair grinned confidently at his friends, the smile of a man who believed courage and stupidity were the same thing. He exhaled and began sliding into the rock. The first few feet were tight, painfully tight. Cold limestone scraped against his shoulders and ribs as he pushed forward. But he was moving, slowly. Then the passage narrowed, just slightly, just enough. Alistair tried to push farther. Nothing. He tried to pull backward. Also nothing. That's when physics quietly raised its hand. You see, the human ribcage compresses when you exhale. That's how Alistair got in. But the moment panic sets in, your body does something automatic. It inhales. And when Alistair took that desperate breath, his chest expanded, exactly 1 critical inch. That inch locked him into the rock like a cork in a bottle. He could not move forward, he could not move backward. He was wedged inside the cave with the finality of a door slamming shut. His friends could hear him breathing, then struggling, then begging for help. They tried pulling his legs, but the stone held him tighter than any grip on earth. Every tug only made the rock dig deeper into his ribs. Alistair had set out to discover a hidden chamber. Instead, he discovered one of physics' oldest rules. If you squeeze yourself into a hole smaller than your lungs, the cave eventually wins. And somewhere deep in the darkness of the Peak District, the Earth quietly added a new permanent resident. Case 3. The Hay Bale Wellness Retreat. In a quiet rural town somewhere in the American countryside lived a woman named Willow. Willow believed very strongly in natural wellness. Not the normal kind where you drink green tea and go for walks. No. Willow had discovered what she believed was the next level of spiritual healing, courtesy of several extremely confident blogs written by people whose medical credentials consisted mostly of good Wi-Fi. According to these sources, modern beds were the reason people couldn't sleep. Mattresses trapped negative energy. Springs disrupted natural vibration. Foam blocked the body's connection to the earth. The solution, of course, was hay. Pure, organic, sun-grown hay. Sleeping on hay, Willow had read, aligned the body's chakras, restored cosmic balance, and delivered the deepest sleep known to mankind. Now, most people who believe something like this might buy a small bale and put it in their backyard. But Willow was not most people. Willow believed in commitment. So she decided to create the ultimate natural sleeping environment, a hay cave. Her neighbor owned a large barn that stored a towering wall of tightly packed hay bales, a massive stack reaching nearly to the rafters. To Willow, it looked like the perfect place for her earthy spiritual sanctuary. What Willow did not realize was that the stack weighed over 10 tons, and like any large structure, it depended on something very important: support. Specifically, the bales at the bottom. Unfortunately, Willow's design plan involved pulling out one of those exact bales to create a cozy little sleeping nook. In her mind, the stack was basically a giant hay Jenga tower. Remove one piece? No problem. Gravity would surely respect her spiritual intentions. After several minutes of grunting and wrestling with the tightly wedged bale, Willow finally pulled it free. She stepped back proudly. There it was, a perfect little hay cave. Soft, natural, peaceful. She probably imagined the profound, nature-connected sleep she was about to experience. What she did not notice was the quiet sound above her, a low groan, the sound of 10 tons of compressed grass suddenly realizing its foundation had disappeared. Physics doesn't negotiate, and gravity absolutely loves a missing support beam. The stack shifted, then collapsed. Not slowly, not gently, but as a massive cascading avalanche of hay bales crashing downward, a silent tsunami of organic material. The cozy meditation nook instantly became the epicenter of a very large agricultural landslide. Willow had wanted deeper, more natural sleep. In the end, nature delivered, just a little more permanently than she had planned. Case 4. The magician who upgraded his own funeral. Times Square has seen a lot of strange performances. Breakdancers, street preachers, guys painted silver pretending to be robots. But among the chaos, one performer stood out. A street magician known as Zoltan the Undead. Zoltan's signature trick was simple and terrifying. He buried himself alive. Assistants would lock him inside a wooden box, place it in a shallow pit, and shovel dirt on top until the box disappeared. 10 tense minutes later, Zoltan would dramatically emerge through a hidden escape hatch. Dusty, triumphant, very alive. Crowds loved it. But Zoltan had a problem. The trick was getting too predictable. And every magician knows the worst thing you can be in show business is boring. So Zoltan decided to upgrade the act. And like many terrible decisions in human history, it started with the sentence, "What if we made it more extreme?" The first upgrade was visual. Instead of a wooden box, he commissioned a clear plexiglass coffin. Now the audience could watch him struggle in real time. More tension, more drama, more views. But Zoltan wasn't finished. The second upgrade was his real masterpiece. Instead of dirt, they would bury him in wet concrete. Think about the spectacle. A magician slowly disappearing beneath thick gray cement while the crowd watches. Industrial, terrifying, unforgettable. What Zoltan forgot to consider was a tiny detail engineers care about. Weight. Loose dirt applies relatively low pressure. Wet concrete does not. Concrete is heavy, very heavy. Each gallon weighs over 20 pounds, and when poured into a container, it exerts something called hydrostatic pressure, meaning the deeper it gets, the harder it pushes outward. The day of the performance, a large crowd gathered. Zoltan waved confidently as assistants handcuffed him and sealed him inside the gleaming plexiglass coffin. The concrete started pouring. Gray sludge slowly covered the transparent walls. Inside, Zoltan played up the drama, struggling theatrically as the crowd gasped. But as the concrete level rose, something else started happening. The coffin walls began to bend. Just slightly, then more. Plexiglass is strong, but it's also brittle under uneven pressure, and thousands of pounds of wet concrete were now pressing in from every direction. Someone in the crowd heard a sharp crack, then another, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. The walls suddenly imploded, the coffin shattered inward, and the prop Zoltan had designed for maximum drama instantly became a gray tidal wave of semi-liquid stone. The audience stood in stunned silence. The show was over. Zoltan had spent years performing a trick where he cheated death. Unfortunately, his final performance was the one where physics refused to play along. And the only magic left that day was gravity doing exactly what gravity always does. Case 5. The Crocodile Bet. In a dusty Australian outback town where the beer flows faster than common sense, two friends named Shane and Davo were participating in one of humanity's oldest traditions, competitive stupidity. The activity of the evening was a drinking contest, not a polite wine tasting, not a casual pub crawl. This was the kind of contest where the goal isn't enjoyment. The goal is to prove you're less likely to die of alcohol poisoning than the other guy. After several hours and an alarming number of empty cans, the contest reached its final stage, the bet. Now, in most civilized societies, losing a bet means buying the next round, maybe shaving your head, maybe posting something embarrassing online. But this was rural Australia, and their punishment involved a creature that had survived the extinction of dinosaurs. The loser had to sneak into a nearby crocodile farm and wrestle the main attraction, a 17-foot saltwater crocodile known locally as Big Kev. Big Kev weighed nearly a ton. His bite force measured around 3,700 pounds per square inch. For reference, that's enough pressure to crush bone like a breadstick. But Davo had just lost the drinking contest, and after 12 beers, human pride becomes an extremely dangerous chemical. Surrounded by cheering friends and the kind of encouragement that only drunk idiots provide, Davo agreed. Late that night, the group stumbled toward the crocodile farm. Big Kev was lying motionless on the sandy bank inside his enclosure. To Davo's alcohol-optimized brain, the crocodile looked less like an apex predator and more like a large, sleepy log. This gave Davo confidence. His plan was simple. Jump the fence, hop on the croc, hold on for a few seconds, become a legend. He climbed the fence, stripped down to his shorts, and dropped inside the enclosure while his friends filmed from the outside. The moment his feet touched the sand, the log moved. Saltwater crocodiles are ambush predators. They specialize in something called explosive acceleration, which is science's polite way of saying they go from zero to nightmare extremely fast. Before Davo could even take a step, Big Kev lunged. No warning, no roar. Just 1,000 pounds of prehistoric muscle moving like a missile. The jaws clamped down instantly. And then came the maneuver crocodiles perfected over millions of years. The death roll. A violent spinning motion designed to tear prey apart and drag it underwater. The entire wrestling match lasted about 2 seconds. Outside the enclosure, Davo's friends went from laughing to screaming. Their phone cameras captured a brief blur of water, sand, and chaos. Davo had lost a bet. But more importantly, he had accidentally entered a competition with a creature that has been winning fights since the Cretaceous period. And physics, once again, delivered a very clear message. If your opponent weighs a ton, has armor for skin, and bites harder than a hydraulic press, maybe don't challenge it to wrestling. Case 6. The man who declared war on a pothole. Every neighborhood has that one problem. The thing everyone complains about that nobody fixes. For Arthur, a quiet man living in a sleepy English suburb, that problem was a pothole. Not just any pothole. This one had personality. A deep, jagged crater sitting in the middle of his street like the earth itself had decided to take a bite out of the road. Every morning, Arthur had to swerve around it. Every afternoon, his car suspension reminded him of its existence. Every evening, he muttered the same sentence. Why doesn't the council fix this thing? Arthur did what responsible citizens do. He wrote emails. He filed complaints. He called the local council office. He even sent photos. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. The pothole remained exactly where it was, silently mocking him. Eventually, Arthur reached a conclusion. If the government wouldn't fix the road, he would. One evening, he drove to the hardware store and purchased a large bag of quick-setting concrete mix. Back home, under the fading light of dusk, Arthur prepared for battle. He mixed the concrete in a bucket until it formed a thick gray paste. Then, he marched out into the street like a suburban civil engineer. The moment he poured the mixture into the pothole, he felt a wave of satisfaction. Victory. But Arthur was not interested in a sloppy repair. He wanted perfection. A smooth, professional patch that would make the city council look incompetent by comparison. To achieve this, he decided the best finishing tool available was his own hand. Arthur lay down in the middle of the road, stretching himself across the asphalt while carefully smoothing the wet concrete. Back and forth. Slowly. Precisely. The world shrank to that one small patch of road. What Arthur didn't notice was the distant hum of an approaching vehicle. A large municipal street sweeper was making its nightly rounds. The driver sat high in the cab, focusing on the curb line as the massive rotating brushes cleaned debris from the street. Street sweepers expect to encounter leaves, trash, maybe the occasional traffic cone. They do not expect to encounter a man lying in the middle of the road wearing dark clothing. Arthur blended perfectly into the asphalt. By the time the driver saw him, it was too late. The heavy machine rolled forward, its rotating brushes continuing their job with mechanical indifference. Arthur had spent weeks fighting a pothole. In the end, he successfully repaired the road, just not in the way he had planned. And physics quietly added another footnote to its rulebook. If you lie down in the middle of a street at night, eventually something bigger than you will arrive. Case 7. Ford versus Chevy, the final argument. Car people take brand loyalty very seriously. For some drivers, the logo on the hood isn't just a manufacturer, it's a religion. And in Texas, two men named Rick and Dave had been fighting one of the oldest theological wars in automotive history: Ford versus Chevy. Rick drove a Mustang, Dave drove a Camaro. Both men had spent years arguing about which car was superior. The debates happened everywhere: barbecues, garages, tailgates, anywhere beer and horsepower were present. Rick insisted Ford engineering was unbeatable. Dave claimed Chevy was the only brand that mattered. Normally, arguments like this end with someone storming off or Googling horsepower numbers. But Rick had recently upgraded his Mustang with a brand new high-performance Brembo braking system, and Rick was very proud of it. According to Rick, his car could stop on a dime. Dave, naturally, called this nonsense. His Camaro stock brakes, he claimed, were more than capable of outperforming Rick's fancy Italian hardware. The argument escalated. Voices got louder. Beer kept flowing. Eventually, someone suggested the worst possible way to settle the debate: a game of chicken. For those unfamiliar, chicken is a very simple game with very stupid rules. Two drivers start far apart on the same road. They accelerate directly toward each other. The first person to slam the brakes loses. And apparently, losing this contest would permanently prove which car brand was inferior, which meant neither Rick nor Dave had any intention of backing down. They found a long, empty road cutting through the Texas countryside, a flat stretch of asphalt disappearing into the heat waves on the horizon. Perfect. They lined their cars up a mile apart, engines rumbling, both drivers gripping their steering wheels. With a final nod, they floored it. The Mustang and Camaro screamed toward each other at over 100 miles per hour. Inside the cars, pride and terror mixed together like gasoline and bad decisions. Neither man wanted to be the one who flinched. The distance between them vanished rapidly. Half a mile, a quarter mile, 100 yards. At the exact same moment, both men realized something important. Their brakes were incredible, but physics had already done the math. Even the best brakes in the world cannot stop a 2-ton vehicle instantly, especially when two of them are moving toward each other at highway speed. Both men slammed their brake pedals. Tires screamed. Smoke filled the road, but the stopping distance required was longer than the distance remaining. The result wasn't a victory for Ford. It wasn't a victory for Chevy. It was a tie. A violent, metal-twisting, physics-approved tie. The argument about which car was better had lasted years. The crash that ended it lasted about 3 seconds. And somewhere, deep inside the laws of motion, Newton quietly nodded. Because momentum doesn't care about brand loyalty. Case 8. The Electric Eel Taste Test. In a small riverside village in Brazil lived a fisherman named Mateo. Mateo had two important personality traits. First, he was extremely good at fishing. Second, he loved attention even more than he loved fishing. Whenever Mateo returned to the village bar with a big catch, it quickly turned into a performance. He would hold up the fish, tell exaggerated stories, and soak up the admiration like a man who believed Discovery Channel might be watching. One afternoon he arrived with something special. Inside a metal bucket filled with water was a massive 6-foot electric eel, and the eel was still alive. Now, if you've never met an electric eel, here's an important detail. They can generate electrical discharges of up to 600 volts. That's enough to stun prey, stop muscles from functioning, and, in certain situations, stop something else: your heart. But Mateo wasn't thinking about biology. Mateo was thinking about entertainment. Inside the crowded cantina, he placed the bucket on the table while his friends gathered around. "Watch this," he said proudly. To demonstrate the eel's power, Mateo dangled a small piece of meat above the water. The eel reacted instantly. Crack! A visible spark jumped through the water as electricity surged upward and hit the meat. The crowd jumped back in shock. Then they laughed. Then they applauded. Mateo grinned like a magician who had just nailed the opening trick. But applause can be dangerous, because applause makes people want a bigger finale. Mateo's brain, now assisted by several glasses of cachaça, started looking for the next step in the performance. And that's when he had an idea. A terrible idea. "They say it has a shocking flavor," he joked to the room. The crowd laughed. Mateo leaned closer to the bucket, and before anyone could stop him, He stuck out his tongue and licked the eel. There are moments in life when physics pauses briefly, almost politely, before delivering the lesson. This was not one of those moments. The eel felt direct contact, which meant its defensive system activated immediately. 600 volts, straight from the eel, through Mateo's tongue, into his nervous system. Electricity travels through the human body extremely efficiently, especially when the entry point is your mouth. The shock surged through his muscles, into his chest, and directly through the electrical signals controlling his heart. His body locked up instantly. The room went silent. The fisherman who had spent his life mastering the river had just learned something important. Electric eels don't care about jokes. They don't care about audiences, and they definitely don't care about punchlines. Mateo wanted to show his friends the power of nature. Instead, nature gave the demonstration, and physics quietly added another rule to the evening's lesson. If something in the water can generate more electricity than your wall outlet, maybe don't taste it. Case 9. The man who thought the liger loved him. In an animal sanctuary in Oklahoma, there was one rule repeated to every employee on their first day. A rule so simple it barely needed explanation. Never enter the liger enclosure during feeding time. Not sometimes, not quickly, not just for a second. Never. For those unfamiliar, a liger is the hybrid offspring of a male lion and a female tiger. It is not a mythical creature. It is very real, and it is very large. Fully grown ligers can weigh close to 900 pounds, combining the size of a lion with the power of a tiger. They are magnificent. They are beautiful, and they are still apex predators with teeth the size of steak knives. The sanctuary's star attraction was a massive liger named Samson, and Samson had been raised from a cub by one of the handlers, a man named Jake. Jake had bottle-fed him, played with him, watched him grow from a striped kitten into something roughly the size of a motorcycle. Over the years, Jake developed a belief, a dangerous one. He believed Samson wasn't just an animal. He believed Samson was his friend. Which is how people end up ignoring rules that were specifically written to prevent terrible things. One hot afternoon during feeding time, chaos filled the sanctuary. Workers were hauling huge slabs of raw meat toward the enclosures. One piece slipped from a handler's hook and landed just inside Samson's gate. Standard procedure was simple. Use a long tool, pull the meat back. Never enter the enclosure. But Jake looked at the fallen piece and shrugged. "It'll take 2 seconds," he told a junior worker. "Samson knows me." Which, in fairness, was technically true. Samson absolutely knew him. Jake opened the gate and stepped inside. At the exact moment, a 50-pound slab of meat was dropped into the far side of the cage. The smell hit the air instantly, and inside Samson's brain, something very old switched on. Not friendship, not loyalty, hunger. Predators don't think about memories during feeding time. They think about food. Jake bent down to grab the fallen meat. Behind him, Samson's massive muscles tensed. The cat's pupils widened. Every instinct written into his DNA for the past 10 million years activated. Jake believed their bond was special. Samson believed something warm and edible had entered his territory during dinner. The attack happened faster than anyone could react. No warning, no hesitation. Just 900 pounds of predator doing exactly what predators do. Outside the enclosure, workers froze in horror. Jake had spent years believing love could override nature, but nature has a very strict policy. It does not negotiate. And physics quietly added another reminder to the rulebook. If something weighs half a ton and eats raw meat for a living, it is not your friend. It is simply waiting for dinner. Case 10. The man who built his own national defense system. In the rugged hills of Idaho lived a man named Jedediah. Jedediah had reached a very specific conclusion about modern society. He was tired of it. Tired of taxes. Tired of regulations. Tired of government officials telling him what he could and couldn't do with his land. So after one particularly long argument with federal authorities over property rights, Jedediah made a dramatic announcement. His 40-acre farm was no longer part of the United States. It was now an independent sovereign nation. He named it Jedtopia. Population, 1. Now, if you're going to declare independence from a superpower, you need one thing: defense. Jedediah, who considered himself a self-taught engineer, began building what he described as a border security system, which in practice meant filling the woods around his property with homemade booby traps, tripwires, swinging spikes, hidden pits, and various other devices that looked like they had been inspired by a combination of action movies and extremely bad survival manuals. But his masterpiece was something special: a large mechanical log catapult. The idea was simple. A hidden tripwire would trigger a tensioned arm that launched a 200-pound log at anyone attempting to enter the territory of Jedtopia. In Jedediah's mind, it was brilliant, ingenious, a perfect example of rural innovation. Eventually, word of this tiny, independent nation reached a small local newspaper. A journalist came to interview the self-declared president. Jedediah was thrilled. This was his moment to show the world his genius. He proudly guided the reporter through the forest surrounding his farm, pointing out each defensive invention. This one stops intruders. That one catches spies. Finally, they reached the crown jewel of Jedtopia's national defense, the log catapult. Jedediah explained how the nearly invisible tripwire triggered the mechanism. To demonstrate, he stepped into the brush to point out the location of the wire. Unfortunately, Jedediah had built so many traps, he had lost track of where they all were. As he walked forward, his boot caught on a thin metal line hidden in the grass. There was a loud snap. The catapult mechanism fired instantly. The massive tensioned arm launched its payload through the air with terrifying speed. Jedediah looked up just in time to see his own national defense system coming directly toward him. A 200-pound log traveling like a wooden missile. The journalist later described the moment as extremely brief. Jedediah had spent months designing traps to stop imaginary invaders. In the end, the only casualty of the war for Jedtopia was Jedediah himself. And physics, as always, delivered the final verdict. Because when you build weapons powerful enough to stop enemies, it's usually a good idea to remember where you put them. Physics doesn't argue. It doesn't debate. It simply waits for someone to say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing," and then it responds. Tonight we watched sharks, gravity, electricity, momentum, and several extremely large animals prove the same point over and over again. Reality always wins. But here's the question I want you to argue about in the comments. How many of these people actually believed their plan would work? And how many were just too proud to back down in front of their friends? Was it the shark experiment guy? The crocodile wrestler? The Ford versus Chevy duel? Or the man who accidentally declared war on himself? Tell me which one made you say, "Yeah, that was never going to end well." And if watching physics humiliate human ego is your kind of entertainment, hit like, subscribe, and come back for the next episode. Because history is full of bad ideas, and the